In general, in the entire economy, we see manufacturers moving more towards the provision of services rather than the provision of hard goods or parts. One of the best ways for manufacturers to compete with the aftermarket is to stop thinking about themselves as a parts manufacturer and begin to consider themselves as a provider of services. The service that they would be providing here is the service of uptime, where they're enabling vehicles to operate more than they have previously. The reason that selling uptime and selling a service creates higher profits is because it requires manufacturers to take on more risk. This is a difficult transition over the short run, but it's really critical because otherwise the lower cost aftermarket is a considerable threat. It's very unlikely that the aftermarket will learn how to sell uptime as quickly as we think manufacturers can. So selling uptime before the aftermarket figures it out is one of the ways for manufacturers to keep their current profits. One of the other benefits of selling uptime is that it has a tendency to lock in the next vehicle sale. Imagine that your customer who has a vehicle that's near the end of life comes back to you and says they'd like to buy another one. What uptime can you offer? You know exactly what you can offer because you've got years of history doing it. We have to separate the uptime landscape between the heavy equipment and truck industry and the automotive industry. They're two different pieces of a very similar topic. Heavy truck and heavy equipment have understood the details of uptime for years. Companies, especially like Caterpillar, have been setting up uptime contracts for big pieces of machinery for ages. Truck companies are a little bit behind. Truck companies generally understand the value of uptime, have a little bit more trouble tracking it, and are not yet setting up many of the contracts required to truly incentivize on uptime. Automotive companies are really just beginning their journey into uptime. Just a few automotive companies are doing any large-scale efforts at tracking uptime, and we have not encountered any who are tracking uptime to the point where they could put it in a contract and work with their customers to pay for it. The biggest takeaway for companies who are considering moving towards selling uptime rather than selling parts and service is that the entire organization really needs to be aligned. Vehicles have to get sold with uptime in mind. Parts have to get manufactured with uptime in mind. Service has to get delivered with uptime in mind. Keeping a siloed organization with sales and service and parts and R&D and manufacturing is probably not an effective way to deliver uptime to the end customers. When we look at the history of companies like Rolls-Royce and Alstom, they've been transitioning more towards a service-driven mechanism for decades. This is certainly a difficult change for manufacturers to make that will not be quick. If manufacturers can understand all of the different factors driving uptime and how the entire organization needs to work together as a whole, they will make that transition to being able to sell uptime faster than the rest of the industry.